From Hong Kong, Chicago, and the city of Stoke-on-Trent, this is the Classic Lenses Podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 82. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Johnny Sisson and Perry G. Hello, Johnny.
Hello, good morning.
And hello, Perry.
Hello.
Okay, well, before we get going, I just want to say thanks to last week's guest, Edward Noble, for guiding us through his work. In particular, we were talking about bokeh panoramas and infrared photography. So thanks for that, Ed. It was really interesting, super technical, but really interesting. So
Bokerama.
Yes. So and actually, that was something. I've just read the summary of the show by a friend of the show on best vintage lenses, Ricardo Bayon, and it's another good read, especially when he gets to the bit about talking about your question, Johnny. Have we actually worked out what your question means yet?
I don't think I knew what I was asking, so good luck for the rest of y'all.
Yeah, so if you've not listened to that show yet, then yeah, there was a question there that sounds fantastic, but none of us can really quite make out what to do with it.
I thought it made sense.
Yeah. Oh, could you explain that to us then?
Yeah, I mean, like, photography is the capturing of a still moment in time, right?
Yeah.
And so with like what Johnny was asking about, a bokeh panorama that kind of left all the imperfections from movement in, it's like you've got a still image with the element of time incorporated in a kind of unique way. It made total sense.
It's a constructed single moment out of many moments that are not one moment. So there is a bit of an odd thing there that would not exist except for the fact that it's in the digital realm and era. That was probably my.
There was a guy in the Classic Lenses podcast Facebook group, Michael Bartasek, who...
Oh, I was going to mention that, yeah.
He posted some pictures of, like, essentially what I think sort of multiple exposures.
Right.
But it was blended, sequential shots blended into one. And it's really cool. You got, like, a dude skateboarding, and you see him kind of kick-flipping off a ramp, and then his celebration afterwards when he lands it, but in the same frame. That's exactly the kind of idea.
Yeah.
It's funny as you mentioned that because when I saw those pictures that Michael posted there, I was thinking, and knowing about some of the subject matter we're going to be talking about this week, I thought to myself, it'd be quite cool to get him on there this week. But then I realised that, well, one, we're recording a day earlier than normal, and we're recording even earlier than normal, and and Michael's over on the West Coast as well. So so I thought,
I bet we can get him on another time, though.
I think we should ask him if he wants to come on. That is cool.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, let's move things on. There's been a huge event that's happened in Chicago. I mean, this is
a massive event attended by ones.
Now, if anybody's been living under a rock for the last week or few days or so, Johnny, perhaps you might want to explain what has gone down.
Well, if you've been living under a rock, you would not know about the first annual Novakian photo walk and pub crawl that happened yesterday in Chicago. So yes, the prodigal gnome Mike Novak returned to his roots here in Chicago, and did all kinds of Chicago things. He's actually still here, but he returned with the express intention of going out on the town with cameras and hanging out with some other fellow photographers. So we had a little get together in honor of Mike Novak. And he stopped by Central Camera with the gang, and then they went out, and I don't know, I think they may have spent more time inside drinking than they did outside photographing. I've yet to get the full itinerary. I was working, so I was not a participant in most of the day. I was a kind of an organizer or influencer, but not really a participant until later in the day. But they spent some some time walking around downtown Chicago taking pictures. It was really funny because right after they left Central Camera to head towards Millennium Park, which is kind of the big gathering place downtown, there was I guess it was like a, I still can't figure it out. It was either a animal rights protest march or a pro-vegan march. I'm still not sure, but there were people walking down the street and chanting and looking unhappy, probably because they don't eat bacon, and I think they got some pictures of that, and then so it was a typical kind of Chicago afternoon where there was all kinds of really weird things happening downtown. So they did that, and then they actually headed up to my neighborhood to go to a place called the Independence Tap. And that's where I met up with them later and I had one drink. I have not had a drop of alcohol really for 3 months. And I had one glass of Bushmills Black, and it was really good, but I felt it in my head in a way immediately that let me know that I still can't be drinking anything. So that was a great experience. Anyway, a big shout out to Mike Novak and to Jose Luis Uribe and Eric Rice and Sonia Milan and Michael Brosolo, who all showed up and were at Independence Tap last night. And there was a live band and we took pictures and people asked us, what are you people doing with cameras? Are you from the newspaper? And we kept trying to say, no, we're just nerds with cameras. And, it was pretty fun. It was a very welcoming place to hang out. And I know Mike was there yesterday and had a nice conversation with the bartender, who is a camera guy. Like I've been in there before and he's engaged me on camera conversations. Like he actually knows cameras. Cause I think like his brother-in-law or somebody is a big camera guy. So I went in there once with my Canon P, and he's like, is that a Leica? And I said, oh, it's a Canon. And we had a whole conversation. Anyway, fun time last night. There's a bunch of pictures floating around on, I think mainly in the vintage camera collectors group. So you can take a look there. We got the typical shot of all the cameras piled up on the table that you got to have when you go on a photo walk and end up at a bar.
There's a distinct lack of a picture with you in it, though. What's going on there?
Well, maybe Mike took some, I know for sure. And Sonia took some, I know for sure. So maybe they'll show up over somewhere on the internet. And then of course the rest of us, we're all shooting film. So depending on when all that gets done, Mike Novak is pretty good about getting his film fairly promptly processed and out into the world. So I'm sure there'll be pictures of me on there because we were all taking pictures of each other. So I'm sure, pictures, photographic evidence to be shared.
Did you get a chance to play with his Canon VL and 35 Biogon he's been waving around?
Yes, I did, in fact. And the VL is, man, that is a nice camera. I mean, it's really to my inspection, it's not that much different from a Canon P, except that the switchable viewfinder, which is definitely a little bit crisper than the Canon P viewfinder. But it handles basically exactly the same. And it's basically like like the trigger version of the camera, but with a lever. And I've handled the trigger version of that camera quite a bit. So I would love to have one of those. Although I actually use the viewfinder on my Canon P because it has frame lines, but I probably would never use the viewfinder on that 5L because it doesn't have frame lines. So it just has you can set the individual magnification to match your lens, but there's no frame lines. So I would never actually use the viewfinder. So that I kind of stick with the Canon P as a camera where at least at 50 millimeters, I actually use the viewfinder and the rangefinder rather than an external I use that external with a 35 on the Canon P, but for 50 I actually use the viewfinder. But I don't think I would if I had the 5L.
And it's 1-to-1 on the Canon P.
Yes, it's 1-to-1 also, which is nice. So
I used to have a VL. Wait, hold on. First of all, you're blowing my mind here. It's 5L, which totally makes sense, but I had no idea. So it's 5L and 5T.
Yeah, it's VL. I think VL is fine, but it's 5. I mean, it's like the 4SB. The IVSB is a 4SB.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize that the camera was so difficult to come by, because I picked one up a couple years ago for cheap in Japan and then sold it off in Hong Kong for a profit when I wasn't really using it. But looking back, it's a little bit smaller than the P, and it's such a nice LTM shooter.
Yeah, and it's still absurd to me that those Canons have gone up in price, but there were less than 10,000 of that camera made. In fact, I think less than 5,000 of that camera made. And if it was a Nikon, it would be probably selling for 10 grand. You know what I mean? If it was a Nikon rangefinder. So it's absurd to me that they're still, I mean, you can still, it's hard to find, but you can still find that camera easily under $500.
I got it 2 years ago for 50 pounds.
That's nuts. Yeah, that's crazy. Considering how well made it is, I mean, they're arguably the best LTM rangefinders ever made. I mean, they're way nicer than any of the Leicas, any series of the Leica LTMs. They're
much easier to load. Oh, I'm such an idiot.
Yeah. Anyway, so see, now you got to go buy another one. That and the Biogon is beautiful. It's basically like a not shitty version of the Jupiter 12.
Yeah.
It's like just a very nice version of the Jupiter 12. And I did find a Series 6 adapter for Mike for that. So he's got that on there now. So now he has a Series 6 adapter and he can put a filter on it, which makes it really great because then you can't change the aperture, which is kind of awesome. So without taking the filter off. So it's, that's the thing about that lens. It's still a really wonky design, but it's much more nicely executed than a Jupiter 12. So, and the image quality is, of course, exceptional. Anyway, yes. So I handled the VL/5L and the Biogon, and they're both lovely. So.
I'm still confused about what you're saying about frame lines, though, because the camera has that magnification in the viewfinder, so you set the viewfinder so that it's I assume a 35 or a 50 or whatever.
Yeah. Right. No frame lines.
But no frame lines, but what you actually see is effectively the frame line. So
you see the entire viewfinder is your, what you use for framing. I just on rangefinders, I don't like that experience. I like frame lines. I don't like not seeing outside the edge of the lens area in the finder.
Yeah, because like,
yeah. Go on. No, go ahead.
Just like the distance of your eye to the viewfinder will affect the field of view that you see.
Right.
The frame lines give you a really clear indication of where your image is, and then where what's outside the framing, right?
And no matter what view camera it is, the edges of the frame are always somewhat indistinct. It's just the nature of that design. I mean, it's the edges of the frame are always going to be, not as sharp as what you're looking at, and I just find it very distracting. And I much prefer a viewfinder with actual frame lines, like bright lines showing the edge of the frame, versus just the whole viewfinder being your framing device. So that's my one. It's funny. It's like all the Canon LTM cameras, like you could take like just all of them and put them on a table, and which actually I kind of have half of that right here in front of me. I feel like, but to me, it's like there is no one perfect Canon LTM rangefinder camera. Like you could, if you could take the bits and pieces of about 4 different cameras and put them into one camera, you would have like the ultimate perfect rangefinder ever made. But that doesn't exist. So I think I'm still sticking with the P as the best, as my favorite at this point. So it's like if I could have the P with the brighter viewfinder of the 5L, but the P's frame lines, but the switchable actual frame lines of the 7, then it would be perfect.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, but there's no one Canon LTM camera that has all of those features in one camera. So you have to, that's what I like about them, is you have to kind of pick and choose the one that's closest to what you like, and you're still going to end up with a really damn nice rangefinder. So anyway, we were talking about the photo walk, weren't we? And then Simon threw that question out there and I got all off track. Yes. So any other questions about that event? It was fun. I I've never met Mike in person before, and it's like he's like a brother, man. He's like it's seriously, it's crazy. It's like KARL. It's like I never actually met KARL ever once in person, which still drives me freaking crazy. But we're close like brothers, right? And so it's really very special to meet Mike in person. And actually, get to talk with them. It was really, really nice. So yes, that was excellent. And I think he will definitely be back in Chicago for a future photo walk. So if you missed it, we will do a more advanced warning next time, and you got to come out and hang out. It was a lot of fun.
And we keep saying it, but we need to get Mike back on the show as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we really do.
Right then, so Perry, you've had your a lens has arrived.
Yes,
that's going to be given away at some point in the near future, and you've been trying it.
So I received a nice little package from the UK containing the Konica 40 1.8 and a chocolate bar, which. Let me talk briefly about the chocolate bar just to continue our culinary theme. It was something called a Tunnux, which Simon somehow managed to smuggle through customs. And it is Simon, is this a British delicacy?
British and Scottish, if you to be Scottish, perhaps more precise. Well,
they're still part of Britain for now.
Yeah, it's a Tunnux caramel bar. That's to give it its correct name. And incidentally, when people buy things on my eBay page or on my website, and I recognise the name for being somebody that's active in one of the Facebook groups or a follower on Instagram and things like that, they tend to get a Tunnux slipped in there as well. Special people get a Tunnux.
Well, thank you for that. That was an enjoyable little treat. But the lens, onto the lens. So I've been playing with it. I've been shooting kind of stuff around the house. I took it out to lunch today, and I've been doing various test shots. And then I also took it out at night for like a serious stress test. And I think I've used it enough to have a pretty solid sense of like sort of how it performs. So first of all, on the Sony A7's body, it's beautifully balanced. Like the handling on the Sony, I think, is its best selling point, because with a lot of SLR lenses, the adapter is huge, and so it kind of like juts out in a pretty unpleasant way. But this is just a perfect size. As for the performance of the lens itself, it's kind of interesting. Like wide open, it's not great. It's pretty soft. It has a kind of like glowiness about it. But like when you stop it down to f2.8, it becomes like a totally different lens. The fall off really tightens up, and it becomes a lot sharper. Like wide open, it has some wild chromatic aberration. And as an aside, I don't know if this is like just me making stuff up, but have you guys noticed that SLR lenses tend to suffer from like worse chromatic aberration on digital than rangefinder lenses?
Yes, I have noticed that personally.
Yeah. So it's like the distance between the back of the lens and the sensor just gives the light more space to screw up, right?
I'm not entirely buying into that one. I mean, certainly the conditions that you're going to be shooting in are going to make a huge difference, and wide open and so on. But I've certainly had chromatic aberration appear with rangefinder lenses. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
But whether or not, as you say, whether or not it's worse or not, I don't really know.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'm making like a gross generalization there. But on the lens itself, I think like there's two things that I noticed about it. Number one, when you stop it down at f2.8, it's got like that sort of ninja star bokeh that you get in some Contax Yashica AE lenses. And then secondly, like the edges are really, really poor. But I think what that means for this lens is it would actually make a really good sort of general purpose or portrait lens on both full frame and APS-C because of the focal length. Like if you don't care about the edges, it's an astonishingly good lens for how much it costs. But if you're shooting like, I shot some nightscapes in Hong Kong with like the sort of city skyline, and even stopped down to f4, f5.6, the coma and astigmatism and just general like field curvature on the edges really screws that up.
Well,
I think there's one of the things that I think people have to always take into consideration is that it is a pancake lens, and lenses that are designed conventionally are not pancake lenses. So I think by definition, to make a lens shorter, flatter, whichever way you want to say it, I would imagine you've got to introduce some kind of compromise into the design. Otherwise, all lenses will be quite flat. So I'm guessing that's actually like the trade-off that you're getting. And in fact, actually, it's very fast as well for that kind of lens as well. Certainly for a semi-wide. It's like the wide end of the standard end, isn't it? But I don't actually know what the actual configuration is, but it just, the look of what you're describing around the edges just is quite similar to what I was describing with that Heliar, the Pentax one, the 58 2.4. It had, the look of the shots had a similar kind of effect where you could see the I can never work out whether it's coma or astigmatism or whichever, but so things were going wrong at the edges with points of light, and it just reminded me of that. So I'm just wondering if they pushed the design.
I've got to jump in and just say the obvious here and blame this on digital, of course, because I've shot this lens on film on my Konica at 2.8 and in black and white, and there ain't none of that shit happening. It's fine. So I wonder if I'm really suspect of the bad copy argument. Everybody always done about it must be a bad copy. I tend to think it's more a sensor thing.
It might well be a Sony thing here, because I think this lens is performing to spec. It's in really good shape.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like I'm crapping on it, but I'm not. It's an astonishingly good general purpose lens. Because like I compared it against my SMC Takumar 55 1.8, which is also a kind of budget lens in the sort of normal range. And the Takumar had like much more saturated colors, and it was sharper. It had nicer contrast wide open. But the trade-off you get is like the Takumar is more than double the length mounted on the Sony.
It's a bigger lens, right?
It's obnoxiously large with the adapter.
Yeah.
And so the Konica on the Sony is like, I mean, the size is just perfect. It's no bigger than a rangefinder lens.
Yeah.
Mounted on, like a Leica adapter. It's great.
Yeah. And so that's been my experience too. I mean, I I have never used it on a digital camera. I've only used it on film. But the size, I would imagine that it's going to handle great because its size is it really is nice, and the Konica adapter is shorter anyway, so it's like you're,
I think I'm going to need to take mine out at night, because I'm more minded to think that there's a bit of sample variation going on here with this one, and this lens. It's quite possible that this lens that we're going to give away to one of our listeners might be a bit of a dud.
I mean, it's when you stop it down, it's the vignetting disappears at f4. It's like much sharper and more contrasty at f2.8. So to me, like, there doesn't seem to be anything obviously like off with this lens. But yeah, I mean, give it a try. What you should try to do if you're going to shoot it at night is try to make this thing flare, because it's pretty hard to make it flare. But when it does, the flare is like, it's insane. It's just this like massive flare that covers the entire frame. And so I actually had fun just sort of seeing how bad I could get it to go.
See, this is the thing. I've got an album on Flickr, and quite a few of those shots were taken at night, and many of them are heading into street lights, at least anyway.
Yeah.
But I guess really the way where your shots really jumped out is because they got they got many points of light, tiny points of light in them, and whereas the shots I've taken don't. They have street lights in them, but they're relatively large sources of light, so you don't get that effect if you got something going wrong with the lens. But the other things that you described, I'm just not seeing in my shots. I mean, because I think with one of them, I think you had like a possible like field curvature going on there as well, and I'm just not seeing that in my shots.
Yeah, they're. I mean, like field curvature wouldn't get introduced in a bad copy, right? Like that's not something that sample variation would cause. I think the thing to bear in mind is the shots that I posted, I was specifically stress testing this lens. I was pushing it to its limit, and I was trying to find the angle to make it flare as bad as it could. So like for general use, you won't see any of this stuff most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few that have got a little bit of flare coming into them, but it's not too bad. But this also reminds me of something though, where because I was having a chat to Jason Lane, friend of the show, Jason Lane, because we did a podcast with him last week on the large format photography podcast, along with Steve Lloyd of Chroma Camera, where we were talking about dry plates and the holders that they've got currently running on Kickstarter at the moment, and that's well worth taking a look at. Chroma Graphica is the Kickstarter that's out there as we speak. But we've been talking about lenses just in general terms, and especially when we're talking about sample variation. And I've always taken the view, well, this is down to how the glass has been manufactured, or how well it's been put into the lens. Because in some cases, certainly like the Jupiter 11, when you put the elements back into a Jupiter 11, or some of the elements at least anyway, they don't actually sit in like little holders almost. They sort of balance in place, and then you put you screw almost like a clamp to it. So it's quite possible to actually put the elements slightly out of whack quite easily, and that will have a very noticeable effect. But after the conversation with Jason, he also mentioned that the tolerances of how the actual lens barrel and the metalwork can also cause variation. So your glass might actually be okay, and you may have problems with the actual the mechanics of the lens as well. Could actually cause issues as well, which I'd never even considered that before.
Yeah, no, that I think that and that's why anytime somebody mentions they've taken their lens apart, I'm like automatically suspect of it, because if you haven't replaced the elements in precisely the right place, and if they're not seated just right, bad things are going to happen. And that's why I don't take lenses apart personally, because if it's the type of lens where elements are easy to not place correctly, it doesn't take much to get them a little bit crooked. So,
Exactly.
yeah, that sort of thing is interesting. But who knows? I mean, I know that you had somebody competent, clean that lens up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and I've read a couple of reviews online of this lens, and their findings are consistent with what I saw as well. But I think, like, if you're not doing what I'm doing, like, I wasn't actually taking that many actual photos. I was just like, how can I make this lens suffer, right? To see how it does. You're not going to do that most of the time. It's a really good general purpose lens. Just don't shoot like landscapes with cityscapes at night with it. Anyway, so after torturing this lens, I think give me another week or so to do some actual photography. It's thunderstorming right now in Hong Kong, and there's tear gas flying around, so it's not the best time to go shooting. But give me another week to do some actual photography with this, and then we'll figure out how we want to give it away. I will put down my X-Pan for a week and use this thing. Speaking of panoramas, by the way, Simon, you've been posting some shots with a panoramic camera. I
have. But you know what? I've got two subjects really to talk about this week, and panoramas being one of them. But I think I need to talk about my trip to London first with the Leica M2, largely because it's not entirely positive, and whereas the Riser story is positive. So I think I'd rather do the down a bit first, and. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago that I'm trying to do a project highlighting high contrast photography. So a few weeks ago, I took the M2 out and put some Triax in it and a green filter and a Summicron, my collapsible Summicron, and just in some early morning sun, and to get some shots. And last week, I then went to London. Was it this week? In fact, it was earlier on this week, I think it was. Yeah, because my legs are still tired. I went to London with my eldest, who wanted to go to London just for a day trip. And I was thinking, well, it's quite cheap on the train as long as you get an early train that takes 3.5 hours to get there and a late train that takes 3.5 hours to get home again. It can go really, really cheaply. So we had 6 hours of walking around London. And it was a great day, and I thought to myself, well, where could be better to take a Leica M2 and try and do some street photography than going round London? Well, for me at least, anyway. Yeah, so it was a pretty ideal thing to do, and I packed an absolute ton of film with me. I mean, far more film than I could ever imagine I would use. But I was there thinking, well, what if I do use a lot of film? And I'm not going to be very happy if I run out. So I think I took about 6 rolls of film with me, all different kinds, all black and white, but all various different things of different ages and so on. And I also took with me a pearl of a lens, a Leica Summicron M50 aspherical lens, which was with me for a relatively short period of time because it is now gone. I couldn't afford to keep that one myself.
Summilux, you mean, right?
Summilux, sorry, yeah. And so 50mm 1.4, beautiful lens. And so thinking, well, what could be better? And I think I soon realised that as much as having the right equipment, I also took a Jupiter 12 with me, by the way, in case I wanted to shoot 35mm. But I was thinking, well, 50 probably makes sense. Plus, you've got a choice between using a Summilux and a Jupiter 12, and the Summilux won't be with me for long. That's the one you're going to use, isn't it? So I had this vastly expired Triax that I was using, and a lovely piece of kit. But I found that when I was walking around, even though you're in a place where taking photographs is something that it's just not difficult to do of people, because everybody's there with the phones out, everybody's taking pictures of the sites and so on and so on. And I still wasn't comfortable doing it, which is not the fault of the camera, of course, because ultimately I'd set the camera up largely for f8 or even f11 because it was bright sun with quite fast film, so really I didn't have to worry about focusing exactly, which has always been the issue that I've had with rangefinders, and as we've heard many times on this show, that you just don't do that with rangefinders when you're taking street photography. You set your hyperfocal distance up and you just compose and take your shot and move on to the next shot. So that was pretty much what I was attempting to do, but I still wasn't really enjoying shooting pictures of people. I just didn't feel right doing it, which is not so good.
Yeah, I mean that's not the camera's fault for sure, but that no, it makes sense though. That sort of apprehension, even in a crowd where, like, I shoot a lot of street photography, but I still get that from time to time, and it's just like that sense of am I encroaching on people's like privacy or their daily lives if they don't want to be shot? It's right. It's one of those things that I think like you constantly, if you work at it, you constantly get kind of better at it. But for me, at least, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is now that my intention to go out there and shoot street, I think it completely skewed my experience of being down there and using the camera. Because it was almost as if, like, when I had that camera, I couldn't actually see anything else to take a photograph of, apart from perhaps some touristy sites where there's a big building across the River Thames or something like that that looked nice. But I felt like I wouldn't normally have taken that shot, or may have taken it on my phone if I was a full-on tourist or something like that. But they weren't the shots I really wanted to take with that camera, and I felt that because I had that camera, I had to take a certain kind of photograph, and which is something that I wasn't happy with, which ultimately meant that the vast majority of my photographs are very, very mediocre, the ones that I took. And this comes back to that thing about using a certain kind of camera is going to give you a certain kind of results, because it puts you in the mindset to use the camera in a certain way. And because that is an area that is not only outside of my comfort zone, it's just an area I just don't think I'm very good at. And
so, Simon, I have a question for you on that. When you go out and shoot large format, do you get the same thing where you kind of like the camera makes you see a certain kind of shot, but it just so happens to be like, I don't know, a forest scene rather than a street scene?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things, doing street shots with large format. I mean, you could do street candids, but that's really. I think street photography and street candids are separate things again, to some degree. But yeah, if I go out to take large format, I've usually know what I'm actually going to take, or at least I've got an idea of the type of photograph I want to take, because that camera is going to give me something. Well, actually, let's put it another way. I like to get the most out of the equipment that I take. So if I was into street photography, I would imagine using something like that Leica. It just seems like it's the right kind of camera to use. Huh? But if I wanted to use the large format camera, or if I was going to use the large format camera, I'd be seeking shots out that, if you looked at the photograph, you would look at it and think there's something unusual about that photograph, and what it is, it's something that large format is just better at than something else, because there are plenty of shots you can take with large format, and they will be virtually indistinguishable from a shot that was taken with a smaller format. It's only when you're actually using the extra size of the film to give you a different kind of perspective, or you can shift the focus around in a peculiar way, that you actually are going to see a difference between large format and just about any other format.
Yeah, so I think you're totally right on this, and it's interesting. I think it's a two-way sort of dynamic, because on the one hand, there's kind of sort of finding what kind of photography you want to do and what kind of photographer you are, and then finding the best tool for like getting the images that you want. So, you know, if you're much more comfortable shooting like scenes in a forest, then shooting that on large format makes way more sense than like on an M2, right? But on the flip side, sometimes, you know, it's like sometimes when I get bored of shooting street, one of the best things to do is just grab a random camera that I would never pick up to go and shoot street, and then just have it like direct you to shoot the kind of stuff that it excels at. Like with the Konica, when I took it out at night, one of the shots I posted was like a bokeh shot of a flower with bokeh in the background, right? Like I would never shoot that normally. I would never shoot that with a rangefinder, but like having that equipment, it was like, oh, well, what is this going to kind of encourage me to do? So, you know, it's a bit of push and pull in both directions. And it totally makes sense to me that like having the M2 and having it excel at street photography, even if it's pushing you to do street photography, doesn't necessarily make you like want to shoot street photography if that's not your thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the camera itself, and actually for the first time, a focus tab on a lens actually made sense to me, because I've almost always used these lenses on my Sony, where and if you have a focus tab and you've adapted it, it's just gets in the way. There isn't really a proper place to actually grip the focus ring like you would do if it was an SLR lens, or for that matter, many other LTM lenses have got better focus grips than these Leica M lenses. But when you are actually using it on an M camera or that type of camera, it does make more sense, because your fingers in a natural place to actually move it. And generally speaking, you tend to pre-focus to some degree anyway, so therefore all you're doing is a little bit of fine-tuning rather than zipping from one thing to another. But even if you did, you know, the throw itself, generally speaking, is actually quite short, so you can get from one to the other quite quickly that way.
And that is why the pairing of camera and lens matters, because Johnny, you know, when Simon first got this lens, I was chatting with him like when you were asleep, and I was like, "Oh, how do you like it? It's a Summilux, a spherical." And Simon was like, "Oh, I don't like the stupid focusing tab." And I was like, "Dude, put it on your M2, and the focus tab will click into place, and it'll make sense." And here we go.
Yeah, definitely. And just another point about using the M2. And using equipment, and it's a bit of a, I'm not sure if it's a paradox, but there's something odd going on, because generally speaking, if I don't like a camera, I don't like a camera, and if I do like a camera, I really like it, and the way that the camera works encourages me to use it and get something out of it. Whereas with the M2, I'm just not getting the results out of it that I would want. And I'm doing different kinds of photography, and it just doesn't seem to work. But the other side of it is, I love to use it. It's beautiful to use. Encourages me to use it, even though I get rubbish results out of it. And I tell you what, there's two things about that camera that I absolutely adore. One is the actual rangefinder patch, and I don't like rangefinders, but looking through the viewfinder is just gorgeous. But the thing that I think about when I have good thoughts about that camera is the wind on lever. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so nice.
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, how you can get excited or have mushy feelings towards a camera just because of a lever, and it's not just the action of the lever. It's that isn't even the best part for me. It's what's on the edge, the actual bit that touches your thumb. It's got and it just grips your thumb perfectly, And I still can't quite get my head around why Leica changed that for like the ones on, like, I mean, people talk about M6. That's like, you know.
Oh, I hate that articulated.
Yeah, they virtually have
the
like the ultimate.
nice.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why did they do it, and why did they persist with it? I just don't don't understand why they would do that, because I've used an M6, or I played with an M6, and I was there thinking it just feels cheap compared to my M2.
Well, that's why they changed it. It's cheaper to have the piece of plastic at the end.
Right.
Because, I mean, you're right. I'm holding my M2 right now, and the amount of times I've picked this thing up just to like advance and fire and advance and fire, advance with like 3 small strokes or 2 small strokes, it feels gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's another camera that's got a very similar action, and it's the Adixaflex, and so it's a German SLR camera, and it has that. I guess one influenced the other in its design, because it feels very, very similar. It's a lot thicker, the bit that actually touches your thumb, but the principle of it and how it works is exactly the same. And wonderful. So as much as like I can't get a decent picture out of my M2, I still don't want to sell it.
I think it was somebody made a comment. It might have been Mike Novak, actually. I think it was. Made a comment that, and I think you've just said it, is that you're sort of laying over on top of that camera an expectation of having to shoot it in a certain way, which is not how you like to shoot, and therefore you end up not really enjoying the camera. And I think you said you just have to shoot it and like just shoot it however you want to shoot it and enjoy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's difficult to get into that mindset, though, isn't it? When you got a camera's got a lot of baggage, like
no, you can. It doesn't have to be, though. Ignore the baggage. You don't have to take that baggage with you.
Yeah, it's utterly and utterly irrational, but it's there.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, it's for me anyway.
Yeah. No, I know. I know what you mean. I do.
Yeah. It's funny, like there are a couple of places in Hong Kong that I've gone to shoot landscapes at like reservoirs and stuff, and I get exactly the same thing, Simon. If I go and I shoot like a roll on a rangefinder, the shots that I've taken landscapes with, I just ignore them. I'm just like, oh, these are just like random shots that don't mean anything. But if I take like literally exactly the same photo on like a medium format SLR or even on a digital camera, like part of me will just take the picture more seriously, even though like it's exactly the same picture. So I don't think you're being weird there. Like I have the same thing with my Rolly cord as well. I love that camera. I love picking it up. I love playing with it, but like I can't shoot well with it for some reason. And yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It's a beautiful sort of machined piece of like engineering. It's light, it's wonderful. But my pictures with it all suck.
Well, I've developed my first roll, which was ancient Triax, and as you've commented, Perry, it looks like it's ancient Triax. So that's not helping my photographs either. They're way too grainy. I'm not a fan of grain unless I actually want to go out and get grain, and these are way too grainy. And there's just
so here's the other thing then, Simon. Just buy a damn fresh roll of film for once, you cheap English bastard. Put a fresh roll of film in your M2 for a change. You've only ever put like garbage old film in that thing.
It's true. Yeah.
Well, I've sort of pushed me to mention that the roll that I put in after that ancient Triax was a roll of 1996 Orwo.
Oh, Jesus.
Like, dude, what's going on with these pictures in terms of how you're developing and scanning as well? Because I mean, the listeners can't see them, but I think there's some cool shots here. But the center of these images looks so much lower contrast and like more overexposed and sort of washed out than the edges, which are darker. And it's kind of a weird look to me. Like,
wait, Perry, I got a question. I think I because I noticed the same thing, right? We were talking about this. So you're using a duplicator, right? A slide duplicator.
Yeah. What
lens are you using with your duplicator?
I've just changed the lens. So I think the ones with the Leica are using a 50mm 1.8 Canon FD lens.
And you're shooting it stop down?
Yeah, they're all at f8.
Okay, and then very important question: your duplicator has a glass element in it, right?
No,
It does not.
no. It's
Okay.
it's an attachment that goes onto the end of bellows.
Okay, so it's not one of the duplicators that
No.
has a
No.
Okay, all right. Because I was gonna say it. I think there's something in that it's either the lens that you're using to digitize, or the duplicator's not holding the film flat, or something combination of.
I think, well, now that Perry's, I hadn't actually picked up about the fact that like the center of the image was brighter.
Yeah,
And I'm looking up now and I'm seeing that now. And I think there's an easy answer to that, and it's the. Oh, I just realised what an idiot I've been. Yeah. It's, yeah, I know I've done wrong, folks. Yeah, it's it's down to the light source, and because diffusing, this has always been one of the biggest problems with using a DSLR or a camera to digitize, is getting the light source even. And
yeah,
I thought I had this pretty much sorted, but I'm using a relatively small light source that's rectangular, and also I'm using a rectangular. Well, the images are rectangular as well. But I just realised that I'm not orientating the images in the same way as the light source. So there's likely to be fall off on the edges, or at least, and if it's not perfectly central, then there could well be more light fall off on one side than the other, which there is. Because it's almost as if there's almost like a slow shutter almost on some of the photos, but not on others. And I just realised that's actually what it is. Now that doesn't explain why some of them are a little bit soft at the edges. I need to look at that when I'm actually doing the duplicating, I think.
That the edges may be curled negatives or something, but yeah, I mean, some of your horizon shots, which we'll talk about next and later, I see like kind of the reverse, where there's this weird look where the edges are brighter than the center. So yeah, something does seem a little bit off about the process here.
Yeah,
if you look at
well, just on that point, there'll be reason I can understand how that could be, because and we're talking about panorama shots now, which are about to get onto, and those shots are stitched. So there's going to be a bit of darkness and a bit of brightness, and you might end up with this slightly unevenness, the way that light comes across.
Gotcha. Well, I guess you got to go back to the lab and rescan all of these.
Yeah, that's deep joy. Yeah, I mean, actually, that's one of the things. Yeah, people talk about shooting film versus digital, because they don't want to sit in front of a computer. Is usually the one that you hear people say. But if you digitize your negatives, then you're spending. I think I'm actually spending more time in front of a computer with my film images than I ever do with my digital shots. Simply because I've got to digitize the things. Sometimes I've got to stitch them. Sometimes I need to edit them in some way to make them so you can actually see what on earth's going on with them and getting colours right and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, shooting analog to get away from computers. If all you're going to do is put them online, that's a bit of a folly, really. I think.
Right.
Yeah. Although, I mean, like on that, I think for me the annoying part of shooting digital is curating the images. A roll of 36. You start the scan, you go get some drinks, and then come back, and it's done, and then you edit. Right. For me, the annoying part is sorting through like 200 digital pictures,
right,
and picking the ones that I actually want to edit. Whereas with film, it's like I got 36 shots, I can curate this pretty quickly. And you're right, you do spend time, actually like, dealing with the scanned file. But
well, the other side to that though is I can find a shot I took 3 years ago or something like that far faster than I'm ever going to find any of my shots of on film, because they just go back into sleeves and then they go into a cupboard somewhere in no order whatsoever.
Well,
you gotta make contact sheets.
Yeah, or organize like your scans in chronological order files or something.
Yeah.
I think I generally take the view that most of my film shots aren't worth going back to. So that resolves that one. Once it's digitized, I can find it. It's good enough, and there we go. One day I'll actually, hopefully I'm going to be printing some this week on Tuesday night at the Six Towns Darkroom.
Excellent.
In Stoke-on-Trent, which I'm going to plug to at the moment.
That'll get you better results.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's move on from my tragic tale. Although,
hey, can I ask one quick question to Johnny on this? Johnny, I don't know if you've mentioned. I think you have, but I've forgotten. What do you do to digitize your negatives?
I've got my copy stand set up with my light pad, my LED light pad, and a super cheap macro lens.
So both of you use digital cameras to digitize?
Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't scan anything anymore.
Actually, on that note, we do have a planned show that will be coming soon, hopefully, and that's when Hamish has finished his pixelator and it's actually going out. So we are going to be doing a almost like a special on digitization and all the different methods and things like that. So we won't go into too much detail for now, I don't think, on that one. So we'll have half a show or a whole show on the subject coming up soon.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I just remembered as well. There's one more part of the M2 trip, and it was as a direct consequence of having Ed on the show last week. I was heading back to the station, and it's not too far from Regent's Park, so I thought, I've never been to Regent's Park, so I'll go there. And in the entranceway, there's what appears to be a Jaguar E-Type, and as you get closer, you realise it's a thing made of plastic, but it's life size, if you like. And I was thinking, I've got a load of shots still to take on this roll of Pan 100, so I thought, I'm going to take a bokeh panorama of this on film. So so I've just got to make some. I think I've got about 1 or 2 shots left. So in around about 8 or 9 months, I would have finished that roll, and then I'll develop it and do the stitching. And it'll be interesting to see if that comes out, because I took probably about 12 shots. And I can't remember if I took them at 1.4 or f2. I might have gone to f2 on it. Of this Jaguar from a 3/4 point of view, and then focused mainly on the headlamp. So that'll be interesting to see if it actually comes out, or whether it's just a complete disaster. So that's all Ed's fault if it doesn't work. Sorry, you going to say something?
No, I said that's cool.
Okay. Right. Well, that's my slightly disappointing Leica story. Which is in huge, can't think of the right word now. Contrast, yeah, to my experience of using a Horizon, a sort of Russian camera, Horizon 202 panorama camera, and which you'll be glad to hear I use some expired film in that too. I've got lots of expired film, and I've got to say this is largely part to Eric Sluice, super friend of the show, who sent me a load of expired film, and I'm just working my way through that, because actually there's this discussion, isn't there, about expired film versus buying new and supporting companies and things like that. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. But there's also a lot to be said about, can you afford to actually buy new film? And secondly, especially if you want to actually take lots of photographs, that's an issue. Not everybody's got a disposable income to do that. The other one is I think you've got to be quite careful when you talk about the environment and shooting film, because of the chemical use and things like that. But I take the view that once something's actually been made, if it can be used, I think it should be used. And so, expired film, it's there, it's been made, carbon has gone into its production and whatever, and if it doesn't get used, then eventually it gets to the point where it can't be used and it's just going to end up in landfill. So I just like the idea of actually being able to use old film for that reason as much as any.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So there's my justification, and I'm an eco warrior. Horizon 202. It's a Russian camera, or former Soviet Union camera, I think, that's made in Russia, and it uses a 28mm lens, which is the lens that we generally like least on this podcast, but there's a big difference with this lens, which is actually unimaginatively called an MC 2.8-28, and it uses a sweeping action. So when you hit the shutter, once you've cocked cocked the camera, you press the shutter, and the lens swings from one side to the other, giving you a panoramic shot, a panorama, and which is just odd in its own right. And also the way you actually load the film into it as well is very peculiar, because it has a curved focal plane for the film to actually sit on, and that's to compensate for the fact that the lens goes through an arc to actually take its shot. So it does its best to try and keep the focal plane parallel to how the arc of the film. I'm sure there's a better way of saying all that, but does that make sense, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an interesting camera. It's a little bit bigger than a normal 35mm camera, and it's got a viewfinder that sticks out of the top that's still built into it. But it's one of those things when you look through the viewfinder, it just puts this big smile on your face, much in the same way as like the Minolta panorama cameras, the compact one that Johnny has, and I've got one in front of me as well at the moment. But you just look through them and you see pretty much what you're actually going to take, and the angle of view is enormous. I think it's about 120 degrees, something like that, and so you just smile when you pick the thing up, and this is where things really do contrast to my experience with the Leica, because as soon as I picked this up, I thought, oh, there's going to be so many cool things I can do with this, and I sort of instinctively knew what to actually do to get the most in, and that's, for me, it was because I've always worked on the theory of filling the frame. That's always been my biggest mantra in photography. And if you fill the frame with a super panorama camera or lens, however it's going to work, you're almost, well, for me, you seem to be guaranteed to get an interesting shot. So I can't believe just how many shots I'm actually happy with that have come from a single roll of film. It's my keeper rate is just through the roof with this camera. It's just great fun.
I'm sitting here with a huge grin on my face. Like, yeah. Johnny, do you want to tackle this first? Because I think we're going to say the same thing.
I just, it looks like you're actually having fun, Simon. I mean, that's, when you shoot large format, it looks like you're sick and your mom's making you drink that shitty medicine that tasted like fake cherry flavor, but it was like bitter and made you want to like retch. And when you shoot this pano, you're like, oh, here's this boat that I'll shoot that's really long, and I'll shoot it on the pano, and it'll be curved, and it'll look even longer. It'll look really funny, and then, here's this bird that's gonna look distorted in the middle of the frame, and that's super cool. And it's just like and here's this Ferris wheel that's on a horizon that's gonna look tilted even though it's flat, but it's going to look really cool. It's like you're having fun. It looks like you're just in the zone, really enjoying this camera, and it's amazing. I love it.
And that's exactly it. It's just pure unadulterated fun. I mean the shot with the boat. I went past the place where I took that shot the other day. Yesterday, and I stood on the spot where I took it, and I was thinking, I actually got that entire boat into this frame. How on earth did I do that? Because I was really close to it as well. It boggles the mind. It breaks physics.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about shooting panos, right? It's like, it's so comfortably natural no matter how wide you go.
Right.
I mean, it's not a coincidence that when like TVs and cinemas and screens started like getting better, they got wider and wider and wider in their aspect ratio, because it's just such a sort of human way to look at the world.
Yeah.
And again, Simon, I love the shots that you're getting out of this horizon, and I don't think these are the kind of shots that you would get from shooting and then cropping after the fact, right?
Right.
Like, looking through that viewfinder is what lets you see the possibilities of shooting pano, and it's just so much fun.
Well, you've got two things there. I mean, if you were to shoot, if you try and get the angle of view in equivalence in a single lens, I'm guessing you're going to be, I don't know, around about 14, 15 mils, something like that, and then cropping.
Yeah.
And this is at 28 mil, so you're still getting the viewpoint of 28 mil, which means that whatever you're taking is brought closer to you, closer to the final shot than it would be if you were using a wider angle lens, which naturally continues to push whatever's in front of you further away from you to fit everything in. And this is always like one of the big things about, going with larger sensor sizes, and ultimately why I like large format, because you're using what sound like long focal lengths, and you're still actually getting wide angle views, and you get a different perspective on things. Things just look different in the same ways. Like, I've used this analogy before. You look at some really, really old photographs that were taken 100 years ago of some famous landmarks, and you turn up there with your, whether it be a full frame camera or your smartphone, whatever it is, and you take what you think is the same shot, and then you look at it, you put the two side by side, and they just, they were the same thing, but they just look different. And why does the one that was taken 100 years ago look better? And that's because it was taken on a large format camera, and it's it's brought the interesting parts of the photograph, whether it be the Eiffel Tower or whatever it is much closer to you. But you're still getting the extra width of the because of the size of the recording media. So that's the beauty of large format. So we'll put that to one side. But the longer focal length helps with this camera, simply because it takes away some, because when you do these super wide angle shots, generally speaking anyway, with a conventional lens, you've got to work very, very hard to actually put something at the bottom of the frame that's interesting, because usually what you actually want to fill is actually a little bit further away. And if you've just got nothing, or you just got your feet in the shot, because that's the only interesting thing that's there with such a wide angle lens, then it's just harder to actually achieve the shot than it does with this method. Yeah,
that's bang on. I mean, like because the Horizon has pretty much an X-pan size negative, right?
I was looking this up earlier, actually. I think I've made some notes for once. X-pan it is larger.
And 65 to 24.
That's it. Whereas the Horizon is 24 by 58.
Close enough.
Yeah, so
it's close.
Yeah, whereas just to put it into perspective, a conventional full frame or 35mm film is 24 by 36. So it's half as much again, wider thereabouts.
Yes. So I think the way that I like to think about it with the lens is on the vertical you get the equivalent field of view as you would on 35, and then on the horizontal your field of view is like twice as wide.
Right.
And we've talked about this before, but it really is the tops and bottoms that are the problem with ultra wide shots. Right. But the other thing about the Horizon that I think is interesting is it has a kind of distortion that's a result of the curvy lens that you don't get on an X-pan, and that gives the pictures like when I look at your pictures with this Horizon, I feel like I'm standing where you are and looking left to right. it makes your eye sort of move in the way that the lens does, and I think that's super cool. That's sort of like, it's not even distortion; it's just like almost a curved image on a flat plane.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. You're embracing the distortions inherent in that camera, and you're like having fun with them. That's what I really like about it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's almost like a pano fisheye effect.
Yeah,
it is very odd, and if you got something that's like a relatively straight line, but there's a bend in it as well, then all hell breaks loose.
Right, which is that shot of the Ferris wheel on the on the pier or whatever. It's like it just lends itself to looking really extra distorted.
Yeah, well,
and the horizon looks off even though it's not, which is super cool.
Well, the horizon smiles at you. I mean,
exactly.
It's higher at the sides than it is in the middle.
Right.
It's just utterly bizarre. I mean, that particular shot, you could tell I was having fun to even bother even take a shot like that. And that was it was taken in Blackpool, and I was heading towards the Central Pier. At first, I was thinking, I'm going to get a photograph and I'll get all the pier in. And I looked at the position and I thought, there's not much of the pier there, because there's just so much width that I needed to get. So I just had to get closer and closer and closer. And I was with my wife, and I was saying, I can still get it all in from here. It was nuts.
Yeah.
She's like looking at me and goes, whatever. And and then I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to keep on going. I want to see just how close I can actually get to this thing and still get that Ferris wheel in. And I knew that the only way to actually physically get the Ferris wheel in was to do a bit of a Dutch tilt. And this is where things go completely, it's mayhem, haywire, when you actually tilt that lens.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you look through the viewfinder, let's say lens camera, when you look through the viewfinder, it's actually got a bubble level in it. So, you can do a pretty good job of actually getting that camera level. And really, unless it's perfectly level, if you have got a straight horizon like the sea, if you're not perfectly level, it will be out. It's as simple as that. And but to get that shot in with the Ferris wheel, it was doing this Dutch tilt method to get it in there. You don't get.
What is a Dutch tilt?
Oh, you don't know Dutch tilt?
No, I'm not familiar with that term.
Oh, okay. Well, I do believe the term actually originated as being a German tilt, and then I think the Dutch popularised it. I think that's the view. But that's when you just take a photograph on an angle deliberately.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because I mean, I like with the photo, you just tilted the camera, but I didn't know there was a name for it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a real thing. And but this is not a typical Dutch tilt shot, because it just goes all over the place. It's twisted, it's bowed, it's just ridiculous. But when you actually in the viewfinder, you can't really see exactly that particular kind of effect in the viewfinder. You sort of get a feel for it, but for me, I was just taking the shot that I had to do it on a silly angle just to fit the elements of the photograph into the shot that I wanted to fit into, the outcome was just amazing. So just in a good or a bad way, depending on how you view these things, really. But I've got the camera in front of me. There's a shot that I've not shared yet. I've shared it with you guys, but I haven't shared it in any of the groups, and we're recording this on a day early on Sunday. What was the date today? Sunday, the 25th of August. So I'm going to put this shot out either later today or tomorrow. But in the vein of just having ridiculous fun with this camera, one of the things about going to like the seaside, like Blackpool, is there are usually plenty of seagulls about, and true to form, there were where we were. And I was thinking to myself, well, there's an interesting thing about this lens, because when you, as always mentioned, it works in like a sweeping motion from one side to the other. And I thought to myself, could I actually get like a bird in flight here and actually get it to the point where the actual sweep of the lens would actually keep pace with the bird? Yeah. So I saw these birds, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna go up to these, and this is a busy area, and I see these couple of birds, and I've got the viewfinder in there. I'm trying to keep the camera level and all of these things, and I realised that I knew at the time just how stupid I looked. He was, people are thinking, why is he doing that? There's just no need. But I just did not care, and I just wanted to get as close to these birds, to these two gulls, as possible, knowing that at some point they would let me get so close to it, and then they will fly, and they will fly from the direction from the right to my left, and I was thinking, oh, this is just going to be absolutely brilliant, and I got the shot. I since realised that when I said like the shot, it takes from the right to the left, I then looked at the camera and I wound it on. I realised, no, it doesn't. It works the opposite way round. So my theory of going from getting the bird from the right to the left was completely wrong, because I should have found two birds that were on the left hand side going to the right. But I'm glad to say the shot worked. I'll be sharing that one at some point. But yeah, I got my physics wrong on that one.
Yeah, it's excellent.
I mean, I just like the enthusiasm with your voice talking about this, because you're clearly having so much fun with this camera, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also think, yeah. Sorry, go on, Johnny.
No, I was gonna say this is like your spirit animal camera.
Not the seagull.
It's like when you take peyote or something, and you have that vision, and you find your spirit animal, and this is like, this is like Simon's spirit camera. Yeah. It's like straight from your soul.
Yeah, I have a panoramic aura.
I mean, the seagull shot is so good, but even all the other shots from Blackpool, to me, these pano shots are better street shots than the ones you've got with your M2.
Yeah.
Which have a vibe of kind of like a forced snapshot. Whereas like these are like, because to me a good street photo gets you into the vibe and the feel of the area where you're at, right? And the pictures you've got from Blackpool, like it feels like you're at the seaside with a bunch of people just on a kind of cloudy day out. And like it feels like I'm in Blackpool when I look at these pictures. And to me, that's like what a really good street shot does. Because, someone can look at this picture in 10 years and still get that same feeling of like, oh, this is what it's kind of like being on a coast in Blackpool, like staring at a seagull.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can definitely say that if I'd taken the Horizon with me to London, I would have got more shots, and I'm sure I would have got more good shots as well. The whole trip would have been a complete blast. I'll be just like dragging my eldest around. He'd be like wondering, why is his dad just manically happy? Yeah. But that was but the reason why I didn't take that with me, it's all Hamish Gill's fault, because I was chatting to him about this trip, and he told me, don't bother taking the 35mm, and don't take the Horizon, just take the Leica with the 50mm. So yeah, Hamish, my shots aren't very good because of you.
He just wanted you to not actually enjoy yourself. That's what I
think so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, it's brilliant, but cameras don't matter.
No, it's not. They're just tools.
They're just tools. Oh man.
So Johnny, how are your pano adventures going?
Oh man, so just to continue on the topic here, I think I've finally found my perfect pano combination. So what I've done is I've taken the mask. I've taken a Maxim panorama mask, which is a little drop-in mask for the film gate that was made for a Minolta Maxim, one of the Maxim models, to turn the camera into a pano camera, even though it didn't have any built-in panorama function. And this cool little device will pretty much go into the film gate of almost any 35mm camera because of the way it's designed. So of course my long long sort of thought of dream of turning a Voigtlander Bessa L into a pano camera has come true. So I've dropped that mask into a Bessa L, and I have the lens I have on as the 21 millimeter f4. So going back, talking about panoramic experiments, I have the Pentax ZX5 with the 17 millimeter RMC Tokina on it, which is really cool for panos. But what I realized is that 17 millimeters in pano is like insanely wide.
Yeah.
Insanely wide. Now, it's interesting. I mean, it made me like shoot some really crazy scenes, and it's fun for that. But it's super difficult to get something interesting. Whereas 21 millimeters in pano is just, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the perfect focus. So the just to go back, my other daily panorama shooter is the Minolta. Well, I always forget the name of it now. It's my Minolta X-Pan is what I call it. But essentially, that camera it's a point and shoot with a 24 millimeter lens. And it's great, but there are those times when I want just a little bit more space. And I'm finding that the 21 millimeter in basically the same aspect ratio it's like absolutely perfect. So I've been shooting it a bunch, having a lot of fun with it, and going to get that film to develop soon. But the handling of it and the aspect ratio and the view and all that it's just incredible. So I've been having a ton of fun with that one as well.
How accurate is your mask on the viewfinder?
I have no idea. I've literally taken some bits of black tape and taped over the viewfinder to what I think is a reasonable facsimile of the aspect ratio of the mask in the film gate, but we'll see. I've taken a lot of shots to try to make it obvious for myself if I'm off with my masking on the viewfinder on the top and bottom, like, in other words, it'll be really obvious, right? Like things will either be cut off in an odd way or whatever. So I'll find out how accurate my taping job was. But eventually I would like to take apart the finder and put in an actual, probably like a really correct aspect ratio mask that could go like inside the viewfinder. That would be really accurate. But I think I have a pretty good. I feel like I shoot enough stuff in that format that I have a pretty good sense of that. It feels like I've got it about right. But we'll see. We'll see what the pictures look like. All right. Well, switching directions slightly, I want to talk about a lens I do not own, but I'm currently the owner of an obsession with this lens. So I'm going to talk about that, and then we're going to do some email. So the lens I want to talk about is the Leitz Elmar 3.5 cm, so 35 millimeter 3.5, which is one of the original lenses. It's the original wide angle lens for the Leica camera, the Barnack camera system when they were first introduced. So we're talking about an early 1930s lens. So going back quite a ways here when the Leica camera system itself was less than 10 years into production. And the reason I've gotten so obsessed with this lens is that at Central Camera, we have a lot of old books, and a couple of books I've been looking through this week are the Leica manual and then the new Leica manual, which are probably the first two volumes that were dedicated, the first two books that were really dedicated to the Leica system. And again, you got to remember that the Leica had been around for less than 10 years and had really kind of revolutionized small camera photography, which was called miniature camera photography at that time. So they used the term miniature camera quite a bit, meaning 35 millimeter. So these two books, and the books are, again, the Leica manual and New Leica manual by Morgan and Lester. So they date from the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And in this book, especially the first one, it's very technical, kind of deep dive into how Leica cameras work and the lenses. And they have these amazing photos in the book of, various shots, shot on Leica. And the shots that really jumped out to me were these shots with the 35 millimeter Elmar. And the other thing that got me kind of really going on this was in the version of the book, the New Leica manual, there's an article in there by Alfred Eisenstadt, and he talks about the way he shoots with a Leica, and he talks about the lenses he used. And I think this might be a bit of a surprise to people who know his work, because I've never seen this article published anywhere. It's only, I've never seen it floating around on the internet. But he says in this book, and this is, again, circa 1950s, he says, for about 95% of my pictures, I use a 35 millimeter Elmar lens. When light is good, I can actually stop it down to 6.3 or even f9, at which setting it's basically a fixed focus lens, he's saying. So very interesting to think about Eisenstadt's work, because I think people think of him as shooting 50 millimeters a lot, which he did, but he's saying that he shot much more of his work on 35, which I think makes a lot of sense if you look at the pictures. Anyway, reading that, going through these couple of books and looking at these photos, there are just some amazing shots with this lens. And part of it, I think it's got to be said, is the film people were using. A lot of the film is the Superpan, the Agfa Superpan. And, looking at that, I guess that film and the way it's reproduced in the books, it has a very particular look to it. So I think I'm probably obsessed with this old Agfa Superpan and this lens. But anyway, I'm going to post a link to one of the books, which is available online, the entire book, as like basically an online PDF. So I'll put a link into that, and keep in mind that the photos reproduced in that link are not nearly as good as you see them on the printed page, but you can still get a sense of what the lens can do. So anyway, it's a very interesting old lens that I really would like to get a hold of at some point. The problem being, of course, that it's a really old Leica lens, and it's kind of crossed over into collector territory, so it's a very pricey lens.
It's so small, this lens.
Yeah.
Just hearing you talk about it makes me want one now, because I realize you could slap it on a Barnack and have it pocketable. Oh,
yeah. It's smaller than the collapse. It's smaller than the 50 millimeter 3.5 Elmar when it's collapsed on the camera. It's really, really small. Yeah.
I think I'm gonna get one. we're not all uncoated, right?
No. Some of the later ones were coated, and some of the early ones people had coated after the fact. So I think actually you'll probably find a lot of them are coated.
Yeah, I've seen coated ones in Hong Kong.
Yeah, yeah, and I know there's a lot of versions of this lens. There's also a version of this lens that has extra close focusing capability. So there are several versions of this lens that are highly sought after. So that makes things a little more difficult as well. But yeah, it definitely has a very particular look, and I think even apart from being used on those vintage film stocks, it would probably still have a pretty particular look to it. I probably to some degree any 35 millimeter lens will do what this lens will do, but I do think that it does have a particular look, keeping in mind that it's essentially the first 35 millimeter lens for 35 millimeter film. So there is something special about it. I mean, there's something special in the DNA of this lens that it was essentially a brand new, pretty much idea to make this lens, and the design brief for it was, to create a lens that had very little distortion, had great depth of field, and it does a lot of that really well. It has a lot of fall off, but I like that look.
Yeah.
So to me, everything about it is very, very interesting, and I'd really like to get my hands on one. So Perry, you need to look for 2 copies of this lens. One for you and one for me.
Oh, there are plenty of them in Hong Kong, but they are not cheap.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my spewing about that lens. I'm going to post that link for the book that I was talking about. And the book is just a really great read anyway, because it's just so interesting. I mean, it's, written in the 30s, the first one. And it's really talking about the Leica as a new system. And the introduction is sort of hilarious, which I'm not going to read it all right now, but it's really hilarious in its hyping of how basically it's like video killed the radio star kind of introduction. It's talking about how the Leica has completely destroyed the field of photography and created this new thing. It's really, I mean, it's over the top in a great way. So you'll want to check that out too. So that's my little rant about a lens that I don't have that will now be harder for me to get because it'll probably get more expensive.
Just a thought there. I've never really understood why. I mean, they may have done it, but it's not something you see, and that's why the Soviets didn't take that design. I mean, they went for the Jupiter 12, which is the Biogon. Design, and obviously there was good reasons why they produced that one, because the reparations or whatever, however you want to look at it, when they took over the ZEISS factory. But you compare that lens to a Jupiter 12, and one looks a lot more complex to make than the other, and it's the ZEISS lens is easily the more complex lens. So I just wonder why they hadn't actually already started to produce their own anyway.
Right, like why didn't they just take this lens and copy it, basically? Yeah, or like make their own. I guess this could be a question for Vladislav Kern, possibly, actually, and there may well have been a 35 3.5 that they were producing at the time that didn't really get out. I don't know, because I feel like if there was, it would be everywhere. Well, but the Jupiter 12 was everywhere because it's a ZEISS lens that they took the design, but that's definitely post-war. So I don't know that there is a pre-war Soviet version of this lens. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't, and I think probably a few things. I think the design. Well, the design, again, they could have certainly copied the design, but it was certainly a proprietary Leica design. But I think a few things. I think that probably the glass they were using made a big difference in the look and the capability of the lens. So they probably didn't have the same glass. And I think it probably would have been complicated and expensive to make as well. And, those set of factors, it was probably not something that someone was just going to take on to make, Well, but you've just, I've just realized, just thinking about the timescales we're talking about, because the pre-war Soviet lenses, though, you don't really hear much about anyway. They were out there, they existed, but you don't really hear anything about them. And I own one of those lenses, and that's the Fed 50mm f2, which I think that goes all the way back to Taylor Hobson in terms of its design. I think it's Taylor Hobson. So there may well be something of that era, but ultimately, you don't see many of those lenses. That's a rare lens in itself. So it's really the mass production of and exported lenses didn't really happen until post-war anyway, and of course, everything pretty much shut down from the late 30s and didn't really get going again to the late 40s. So that would also explain that lack of
of those lenses on the market. So there probably was something out there, and probably is something out there, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, definitely could be.
Because they ceased production of this lens in 1948, right? So
I believe so. I would have to double check that because it was replaced by the Summilux, essentially. So, which would be considered a superior lens in every way. I think they even probably talk about that. No, so the first copy of this book is so old that lens had not come out yet. But I know that in the newer version of the book that I have, they talk about that. I mean, they basically say that, the Summilux is, better in every way and it's an improvement, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of I think that's the appealing part of this lens is that it has a very particular look because it's from a particular era. And
the Summilux is larger.
It is larger. It's still small, but it's definitely, the barrel is larger. Yeah.
I don't think there's a 35 millimeter LTM lens that's smaller than this. I haven't seen one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, well, there's that Miyazaki lens.
That's a 28. Yeah,
right. That 28 I think is probably a little smaller, but I don't think there's a smaller 35.
Yeah. The MS one's like a body cap.
Yeah.
But in terms,
the one I think that I have handled that is not much bigger is the Nikkor 35 2.5. Yeah. That's almost as small, actually. That lens is very compact.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Kind of juts out a little in the middle. That's it.
Yeah. But I mean, it has a really different look. I mean, a completely different rendering look. So yeah. Anyway. All right. So that's my little mini rant on that lens. And then following on that, we want to read an email that sort of is related to this. And then we're going to read some more emails, but here's the first, which is related to this lens. It's from our buddy Eric, and the subject is podcast question. And Eric says, "Hey guys, I have a question that may be interesting. Quote, why does the new version, that is the ELMAR-M 50 millimeter f2.8 1994 to 2007, Leica doesn't get the love that it deserves, in my opinion? Extremely sharp, great UFTA, LOL. Very small, smallest and lightest, I think, and quite a lot less money to pay when compared to a same period Summicron. I've seen them go for under $500 on eBay and less in the local market. You don't hear about this lens. You hardly see it used. Few pictures are published by it. Just a true sleeper, or does the average RF shooter just want the Summicron? Of course, the 50 millimeter classic by Wetzlar. Anyway, could be a nice question to put your teeth in. So all the best from Southern Belgium, and have a great show, Eric Koss."
Okay, so can I jump in on this one?
Yes.
So thanks for the question, Eric. I think he's right. This lens is a fantastic lens. I've played with it a bunch, but I've only owned the earlier first LTM version. I think the reason this lens kind of flies under the radar is for exactly what he says. Because I mean, if you can find them for less than $500, I would jump on it. Because here in Hong Kong, they're going for just under like $800.
Wow.
And at that price, you can pretty much pick up a version 3 Summicron.
Yeah.
So I think, most people, when they're looking at a 50 millimeter, f2.8 will put a lot of people off, which I think is, somewhat unjustified, but you can understand, people want a faster lens.
Right.
But yeah, it's such a good lens. I mean, it not only is it collapsible, but like they really improved a couple of the handling elements, and it doesn't quite like there's something about the handling of some of the old collapsible 50s that make them feel kind of like protrudy and flimsy to me.
Yeah.
Or they've got like an obnoxious infinity lock that I don't like. This one does feel a lot nicer, but for a collapsible 50, it's really expensive, even though I think it's worth the money.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I just think there's a general bias against quote unquote slow lenses, and a 52.8 is considered a slow lens, as is of course a 35-35, right? Because everybody wants faster lenses. And I think that, to me, that's part of the attraction, though, of these older lenses. I mean, people were using slower films, like films that were called super high-speed films in 1940 were probably, ASA 200. So they were using slower lenses with slower films and doing just fine. But I think it's like, if I'm going to spend $500 on a lens, why would I want to not have an f2 lens versus a 2.8 lens, right? Because it's going to be more versatile. So,
exactly. And I think when people are picking like a Leica lens, the collapsible lenses are desirable partly for their portability. Yeah. And given that you can get like a version 1 Summicron or a Sumar or a I always get Sumitar and Sumaret mixed up. But I think like the f2 collapsibles are actually cheaper than this one. Even though optically I think they are inferior. But I mean, that's why people buy them, right? That extra stop is just too sexy.
Right.
Well, when I took one of the shots in London earlier this week, it was on a tube on the Underground Railway. And I forget what, 400 film, but the light isn't particularly great down there. And you want to keep your shutter speed to a point where there's vibrations. It's impossible to hold the camera perfectly still on the rickety tube. And so I took a couple of shots there at 60th of a second, which was as slow as I dared go. And to do that, I was still actually I had to shoot at 1.4. To the point where, if I had this 52.8, I don't think I would have taken the shot, because I know that it would have either been full of motion blur or just hopelessly underexposed. But even at 1.4, it was still underexposed. But it's a passable shot for what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really important point, because if you're shooting outdoors, like, who cares? It doesn't matter, right? But like, light is light, and it doesn't really change in terms of its properties. So if you want to shoot in lower light, that gap between f2.8 and then stuff that's faster than f2.8, I think is the kind of bridge of usability in either like low light outdoors or artificial light indoors. 2.8 just not going to cut it, at least on film, right? With ISO 400.
Well,
you can always push your film.
Well, but see, that's part of what I think is really interesting, is that if you look at, and Eisenstadt has a few shots like that. And as a matter of fact, I'm trying to find it. There's literally a subway shot on like 200 speed film at, probably a quarter of a second. And it looks really good.
Yeah, well, the train might have been at the station, and he might have wedged it up against the vertical, and
but that's what I'm saying is,
I didn't even have that luxury, because wedging up against the vertical, the vertical would have been vibrating.
So here's on page 300 of this book, there's a photo. It says, subway riders offer daily challenges of scenes for Leica photographer. 50 millimeter Sumitar f2, 1/10 of a second. Super XX film. So here's a 1/10 of a second exposure, wide open at f2, and it works, and it's great. And the reason it does is, yes, I'm sure the train was moving, right? But if you can, there's a lot you can do technique wise with how you hold your body and the camera and bracing and this and that. You can still get sharp shots. Now, he probably took 12 more shots that weren't sharp. But in other words, it can be done. And I think what it is that in a lot of the photos in this book, they show basically a lot of effort going in to make shots that are sharp in challenging conditions. And I think that's part of what we kind of don't really do anymore, because we just shoot a faster lens. And I think that's what's attractive about looking at these books and looking at the photos, is you can see how much planning and thought and effort and just work went into making a lot of these shots. And I mean, on the opposite page, there's a shot of people standing on the street, and it's shot under marquee, outdoor illumination. And then caption is 50 millimeter Sumitar f2, 1/20 of a second on Super XX. So it can be done. It just requires a more thoughtful technique and really focusing on breath control and everything else, but it can definitely be done. And I just think it's like, why not just pick a faster lens and you don't have to try as hard? And that's not saying even that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's more a comment on how people maybe used to shoot this stuff versus how you shoot it now, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because, nowadays I think people tend to go by the 1 focal length rule for hand holding.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty good rule of thumb. And then there's like a kind of psychological block from going lower than that.
Right. Which I'm fully guilty of myself, by the way.
Oh, yeah, me too. Which is why everyone wants IDIS, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But so assuming you're going by that kind of rule, like obviously the faster lens just gives you a way to make exposures in those low lights if you're not as skillful.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
that you don't have to try as hard.
That pretty much told me, didn't it?
No, I do the same thing. Like, we all do, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't shoot 1/10 of a second on a subway unless I want to
film. It's really difficult. And right. But I mean, I guess that's what is inspiring me a little bit about this book is that it's definitely possible, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, the Eisenstedt article, he talks a little bit about that technique-wise, like how he shoots in low light. So I don't know. Yeah, I think they're really interesting lenses, and I'm probably ultimately just as guilty of that, though. I mean, I don't think I would. The first thing I would spend $500 on would be a 50 millimeter 2.8 ELMAR-M. You know, so. Yeah, it's just the nature of the world we live in now and how we do things, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's comparing with other options because I think the two modern-ish collapsible lenses that Leica made, this ELMAR-M and then the 90 f4 collapsible macro.
Yeah,
like those are really nice lenses, but people just don't buy them as much.
All right, well, shall we move on to hit the other email here that we have?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we start with 3D pop? So, subject 3D pop from Jay Buie, Buie. What in Sand Hill is 3D pop? In 50 years of commercial photography work, your podcast is the first place I've heard this term. Jay, Mississippi, USA. All right. So.
Well, I think the first answer there is it's all Carl's fault.
It's all Carl's fault.
It is. Yeah. Carl was Mr. 3D pop.
Carl is Mr. So can I just tell a quick story? And because Simon is the only other person on the planet who knows the story. We at one time were plotting a Simon 3D pop drinking game for the podcast, where we were going to see how many times we could get Carl to say 3D pop. And then we were going to record an intro before that episode that said, every time you hear 3D pop, you should be having a sip of a beverage because it's the 3D pop game. And we never got to do it. And I'm still sad that we never got to do it, but we thought about it at least because Carl loved his 3D pop.
Yeah. It was obsessed by it, and I think that was actually the reason. That was the thing that took him over the edge for him to lose the his Olympus Micro Four Thirds camera and go full on Sony, to go full frame, to just get that 3D pop effect that much easier.
Yeah. Right. So I know Perry's going to talk a bit about 3D pop, and I just wanted to throw out there that. Perry, of course, will be able to articulate it better than I can, because Perry can articulate anything better than I can. But I will say that there is let's call it a white paper on ZEISS.com Lenspire that I will also put a link for, where they go to great lengths to try to justify the use of the term 3D pop, because I think in a lot of ways ZEISS would like everyone to believe that their lenses do in fact have a special something called 3D pop, right? Also known as micro contrast. So there is a scholarly look at that on the ZEISS website that I'll throw out there. But Perry's going to talk about 3D pop a little bit too.
I think this is one of those terms. I mean, I'm guilty of using it all the time. I think this is one of those terms that means something different for everyone.
Yeah.
Because for some, they use it to mean like depth of field. For some, they use it to refer to micro contrast. I think it's a combination of a lot of different factors. But to me, the way I understand the term is like photography is a 2D medium, right? And when we perceive the world with our eyes, there are kind of like visual cues that, well, we have two eyes, which helps us perceive things in 3 dimensions. So on a 2-dimensional medium, there are visual cues that help us kind of understand both depth and kind of relationships of distances. And so there are some images where when you look at them, you perceive them in a way that look a lot more real to you. And that to me is what sort of 3D pop articulates. Like the stuff in the picture just looks 3D rather than 2D and flat. I spend way too much time thinking about this in terms of like, well, is it contrast? Well, no, it's not contrast because it's not just contrast. Because if you took like a super high contrast like picture with just blacks and whites, it wouldn't have 3D pop. Micro contrast, which you can see most on kind of flatter images, that kind of distinction between similar tones seems to be correlated. But ultimately, like to me, I think there are a couple of factors involved. Number one, it's different for every person who views an image because everyone kind of just has a slightly different perception. But number two, I think lighting makes the biggest difference. So you can get kind of 3D looking images if you have certain kinds of directional lighting or mixes of soft and hard lighting. Depth of field definitely makes a difference, but as Simon has mentioned before, it's not a case of like, shooting at 0.95 so much as getting a perfect depth of field so that your eyes can sort of subconsciously perceive the relative distance of things in the shot. And then the subject like really sort of stands out with that perfect depth of field. But ultimately it's just like when you look at a picture and the subject like almost jumps out at you. Contrast has a lot to do with it as well. And I think like some lenses are inherently better at rendering sort of 3D poppy looks, especially in bad lighting. Like the 35-28 Biogon is a lens that I rave about all the time because in crap lighting, it is able to render kind of micro contrast and depth of field in a way where subjects just jump out of the frame for me, even if I'm shooting at like f8. Yeah, I hope that made sense.
Yeah. It makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah, well, me too, because you've explained my take on 3D pop there as well. I mean, I suppose the micro contrast part is just the way that the subject that you've taken and we touched upon the bit about the depth of fields being correct. So, for instance, if you're taking a picture of a person, then their body will be sharp and the background will be blurred. Excuse me. And the idea will be that you control your depth of field, so it's pretty much exactly the depth of the subject or the person that you've taken. So anything in front of it or anything behind it will be out of focus to whatever degree. So that's like how to achieve it, if you like. But the other point though about micro contrast is just the way that how the subject that you've taken, how defined that subject is against the blur. And I think if you've got a pretty high contrast, if you've got quite high contrast to the edges, so I think this is where the micro contrast comes in. So the way that the edges of the subject is defined, and if it's really, really sharp, then you're going to see that it's going to jump off the photograph more so than it would do if you're using a lens of lesser contrast, even if you've got the depth of field correct.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people who are going to say like, oh, this doesn't exist and this isn't a thing. But I think like the most convincing way the thing that convinced me that this is a thing is actually not photography, but looking at paintings and sketches and illustrations, where it's very clear that when you render kind of tones or sketch and paint light in certain ways on a painting or an illustration, that sometimes you just like nail it and it jumps off the page and you perceive it as 3D, even though someone has drawn the thing, right? So it's that kind of like perceptual impact.
Yeah. And of course, when something's actually painted, you absolutely have that hard edge, because it's an analog hard edge, isn't it? It's whereas this can be quite harder to achieve when it's on, well, certainly on film and even on digital, just to get that definition between what's in focus and what isn't.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add is that film like format makes a huge difference. Like you can on medium format and larger, you can pretty much make anything 3D pop. It's a lot harder to do on smaller formats. Like you can, it's so easy to make things do it with certain medium format cameras and lenses. There are a few different combinations that will just pop like crazy. And it's just inherent in the fact of using a bigger piece of film. And I'm saying film and not sensor because we're really limited in how big our sensors are at this point, still for the most part. But you really, I mean, you can look at, photos shot in the 1860s that have 3D pop, no problem, because you're looking at, a big glass plate with a lens that was shot close to wide open, and it pops like crazy, and it's got incredible definition and depth to it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of it, I think, is film format too.
When we had Pear on a couple of episodes ago talking about the GFX, we had a discussion where he was saying that he thinks 3D pop just refers to depth of field, but I really don't think that's the case for exactly what you just said, Johnny. Because to me, every single large format portrait I've ever seen is just like oozing 3D pop.
Right.
And if you get a 35mm shot with exactly the same depth of field, it doesn't have the same look, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't pop.
Exactly. Yeah. And the one that comes to mind for me all the time is there's a couple of them from the American Civil War era. There's a certain photograph of Abraham Lincoln, and there's a certain photograph of Frederick Douglass, and they look like supernatural. Because first of all, it's hard to believe these people were actually once actual people because they're such, huge figures sort of, but also just the photographs themselves have this like incredible 3-dimensional depth to them that are sort of mind blowing. So I do think it's more than just depth of field as well. It's
the medium too, like glass plate.
Yeah,
pops like crazy.
It does. Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
Well,
all right.
I was going to say, you mentioned glass plates, so that's my intro there again. If you want to know more about glass plate photography, listen to this week's large format photography podcast with Jason Lane and Steve Lloyd and my I'm going to call him co-captain. Well, I'm not on the negative positives podcast, but whoever, he is now, at least anyway. And that's Andrew Bartram, and those that's one of those areas where large format really stands out for exactly the reasons that Johnny has said there. The images just look quite unlike. You just can't. Well, I suppose if you're particularly good in Photoshop, you can get some kind of approximation of the look that you get, and you can get filters that'll make smudges all over the place and make it look like it was potentially done that way. But there's just, you can't beat the original. And what's also amazing is just like I don't think there's any grain in those images. I think they're actually grainless. So you expand them, and they just seem to just keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the look is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well, shall we move on to our last couple of emails?
Yeah, I think we've got two emails which we can do really, really quickly, and then let's do the last one after that.
Okay, so the next one is from Aaron Alfano, and his question is regarding Litex conversions. And he says, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I've been curious about the Litex conversion kit for modifying Contax, Yashica, and Leica R lenses to Nikon and Pentax mount. Today, I found a local dealer who is selling 2 mouth-watering ZEISS Contax CY mount lenses at what seem to be reasonable prices. I'm not too interested in getting into yet another lens mount system, but would love to be able to use these lenses on my Nikon cameras. Do any of you have any experience with Litex conversions? If so, what are your thoughts? Thanks, and keep up the good work with the podcast." Aaron Alfano.
Okay, well, I know Johnny and Perry have not got a huge amount on this one. I haven't got a huge amount on this one either, except just to explain what happens there. I believe the mount is replaced, so you can put your Contax Yashica lens with a differently sized mount that will then go onto a Nikon camera, and it will focus to infinity. And I believe it's reversible as well. But if it wasn't reversible, I wouldn't be very happy at all about that. But it is. I believe it is reversible. Somebody that does do that is friend of the show, M from Emulsive, because he's converted a few of his lenses over to use on Nikon. So if you want to have a bit more first-hand advice on that one, perhaps you might want to send him a message via emulsive.org, and he can give you some proper advice.
All right. And next up, our last email, which I'm just going to say, we're not really going to dive into this whole email right now. I'm going to read it. It's a suggestion. But we're going to kind of leave it as a suggestion and maybe deal with it in another episode. But it's from, and I'm going to try to get the name here right, from Bader Elmar. And he says, "Simon and the rest of the team, I am a keen follower. Enjoy the podcast from episode 3. Never missed an episode since then." Well, thank you very much. That is cool to hear. And he says, "Sorry for the loss of your friend Karl. I have a suggestion. There is a great YouTuber, amazing storyteller who seems to have experience and knowledge about legacy stuff. I urge you to watch this 25-minute recent episode." And there's a link here. And he says, "And maybe try to approach him. I think he lives in Australia. Many thanks, Bader." So we will look at that link. And yeah, we appreciate the suggestion. And maybe that's something we can do in a future episode.
Yeah. Did you hear a small amount of music then, by any chance?
I did not.
Oh, that's okay. So it's just on my earphones. But I'm just trying to go onto the. I'm just going onto the actual YouTube link at the moment. So it's playing music in my ear, very, very loud at the moment. But I'm trying to let people know what the name of the person is. So. Why do we take photographs?
Hi, my name's Terry Lane.
Terry Lane,
and
there
from
you go.
time.
So that's the name of the chap anyway. So yeah, we'll put a link in there, and we'll have a listen to that when we get the chance.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks for the suggestion, and we do appreciate your emails and suggestions. And we know we have other email that we have yet to read from previously sent, but we will try to get to everything at some point in time. So keep them coming. Okay. Do we have other topics, gentlemen?
I just realised I think we have actually done the emails now, haven't we? I thought we had one more, but we did.
Have we done everything?
It was 3D pop as well, wasn't it? So yeah.
I thought there was more from like previous weeks that we'd still not gotten to, but
there could well be. Actually, I know that Andrew Bartram keeps reminding me that he wrote to us about what's all this business about aberrations. So
okay,
yeah, that'll be one that we need to chat to Jason Lane about when we get him back in the near future.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, okay then. Simon, are we gonna?
We need to wrap up now. We've been talking for long enough, haven't we? Well, before we do any quick one last around the table thing, let's just see how we're doing on coffee donations. And I usually have this page up, but I didn't. So let's see. It's coming up now. Right. Okay. So that was Nigel Cliff the other week. We did that one. Yeah, we've had two donations since last week, and both of them from Mike Epstein. Or Epstein, and so thank you very much. And he's put on there 3 coffees for our 3 hosts. Thank you for keeping the gas alive, and thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. But that's it. So if anybody wants to help us along, you can just go to coffee.com. That's ko-fi.com. And actually, I'm just wondering if we actually mentioned that we had a couple of recurring payments as well from James Thorpe and Brian Warwood. So thank you for those as well. We really appreciate that. So Perry, anything else you might want to get off your chest very, very quickly, or any shout outs or anything like that?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, Johnny?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, well, Perry, then, how can people keep up with the things that you get up to outside of this podcast?
You can find me on Instagram, Flickr, or my website, which are all PERRYGE and .com for the website.
Okay, and Johnny?
You can find me at Sisson Photography on Instagram, and you can find me at Central Camera Company in Chicago most days of the week. So stop by and say hello.
That's cool. And what's our presence on Instagram?
Well, on Instagram, you want to follow Best Vintage Lens, and they feature classic lens photos there. Some great stuff to be seen there, and they also kindly provide a review of this podcast on a semi-regular basis. An insightful and interesting review of this podcast will be found over there on Best Vintage Lens as well. And we do thank our friends at Best Vintage Lens for that work that they do, which of course is better than the podcast itself.
It is.
Yes. So check that out. And again, please continue to send us emails. You can do that at classiclensespodcast@gmail.com. You can, of course, find the podcast itself at classiclensespodcast.com and connect with us there and listen to all the back episodes, et cetera, et cetera.
And
yeah.
Is there another way that people can listen to this podcast?
As a matter of fact, there is.
Oh, wow.
You can do so with visual aids if you so choose. And you can do that apparently, haven't checked it out myself yet, but you can do it over at YouTube. And you can see how it tries to translate all of the crazy things that we say, because apparently it does try to do that. So... So check that out.
Yeah, it makes as much sense as we do at times.
Yeah.
And I can be found on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic. I'm on Twitter as Simon4. Where else am I? I'm on Flickr, but I still haven't put anything on Flickr forever. I have a website where I'm selling stuff, which is simonforster.co.uk. I also have a eBay shop, and there are quite a few bits and bobs on there which might be of interest to people. And links to how to find me on there will be in the show notes. So that's it. I want to thank Kevin MacLeod for our music, which is Octo Blues, and that can be found on incompetech.com. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's show, and if you can, be like KARL. I'll give you something to listen to in the meantime. Here we go. You ready?
Whoa.
That's the horizon, right?
It is, yeah.
Wow.
Here it goes again.
Wow. That's impressive.
This is the X-Pan in contrast.
Oh
my God, yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Don't want an X-Pan anymore. There's no life. There's no life in the shots.
Here's what's funny. I was actually yesterday at the shop. Somebody was asking me about the. We have a Wide Lux 7. So I was messing with the Wide Lux 7 with them, and so it's really funny having shot the Wide Lux 7 several times yesterday, which makes essentially the same sound as your Horizon makes, but it sounds like your Horizon is like those wind-up toys that were made of metal where you wind them up with a little key thing and they zoom across the room.
Yeah.
That's what your camera sounds like in comparison to the Wide Lux, which is basically a smooth version of.
Yeah, I've got no doubt about that whatsoever.
Yeah. Which makes me really, really want a Horizon, because Vlad has been trying to hook me up to get a Horizon for ages, and now I have to get one.
Yeah,
so, you do. You absolutely do.
I have to get one.